Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing one of my most requested videos, which is Shakespeare for beginners. I did one of these for classics last year, which I will link in the description. And ever since I've done that video, people have been asking for this one, so I thought I'd give it a go. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, in case this is the first video by me that you've watched. I am an English teacher. I am a massive Shakespeare nerd, massive Shakespeare fan, and yeah, I'm gonna chat with you a little bit about where you could start if you were new to Shakespeare. So there are 37 Shakespeare plays and 154 sonnets. I did have to briefly look at my notes just then, just to make sure I got those numbers right, that are attributed to William Shakespeare. He is obviously arguably the foundation of the canon of what we teach, at least here in the UK. And he can be very intimidating to a lot of people. I think a lot of people have a negative association with Shakespeare, you know, that they were forced to march through a play while they were at school and the language is hard and it's all a bit weird. And yeah, I think there's a lot of like anxiety or negative feeling that builds up around Shakespeare. However, it's something that I love. So if I can help communicate that a little bit to you guys, then great. I think my main piece of advice with Shakespeare is not to be afraid. And I know that's easy to say when, as someone who has read all of Shakespeare and has studied him a lot, but just don't be scared. It's just words on a page. And I think a lot of people get hung up on it because he is the bard and it's the canon and, you know, you have to read Shakespeare to be well read, which is total rubbish, by the way. And if you never want to read Shakespeare, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't make you any less of a reader or any less literate. It should be enjoyable. So kind of my first thing is to try and let go of that fear. It's just words, it's just plays, it's just poems. They happen to be poems and plays that have lasted hundreds of years. And yes, they are poems and plays that millions of people at this point have enjoyed, but it's just literature, it's just words on the page. So try and let go of that like, oh, it's Shakespeare, it's gonna be scary, it's gonna be hard. It isn't, it doesn't have to be. So that's my first big tip. Secondly, and this is very much what I said in the Classics for Beginners video that I did, I think the best way into any new genre, be that Shakespeare or thrillers or literary fiction or middle grade, is find what you enjoy already in other areas of literature and find something that connects in that new area that's familiar. So for example, I'm going to talk through, I've got 5 plays here. Is it 5 plays? 6 plays that I would recommend based on what you are already reading and enjoying. So if you are into YA, young adult, if you are into contemporary, if you are into romance, I would recommend Romeo and Juliet. These editions are the beautiful Macmillan Library editions. I love them because they're so pretty and they're compact and they've got gold sprayed edges. I mean, what's not to love? So Romeo and Juliet, so we've got Juliet on the front, Romeo on the back, is the classic star-crossed lovers story of a boy and a girl who meet and fall in love, but their families are at war with each other and it's about what happens to them. If you like contemporary stories, YA contemporary stories, this I think is a great place to start. You know, I teach this to my year 9s who are 13, and you know, it's got gang warfare and it's about rebelling against your parents and it's about first love and the stupid things that we do when we're in love for the first time. And yes, that is where I would start if you are a fan of YA. If you like fantasy or things that are a bit on the weirder side, then I would suggest A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is weird. This is a weird story. It's got play within play. We've got fairies. We've got potential kind of drug-induced daydreams. We've got lovers. We've got a man that turns into a donkey. Any of this appealing to you? Yeah, I love Midsummer Night's Dream. This tends to be the first play that people get exposed to here in the UK. I know that my stepson, who is 11, they studied this, or like parts of it, an abridged version last term, and I think they're doing it again in this, not last term, last year, and I think they're going to do it again in the summer term this year because it's fun, it's silly, it's quite easy to follow. This is the illustration on the back of this edition. I mean, how gorgeous is that? It's just it's a bit weird, it's fun, it's short, and that's what I recommend if you are a fantasy reader. If you love the enemies to lovers trope, and if you like quick-witted, strong women, or strong female characters, then I would definitely recommend Much Ado About Nothing. It's personally my favourite of all the plays, which I think always surprises people because it's seen as less highbrow, I guess. But we're going to talk about Shakespeare in context in a minute. This is my favourite of the plays. We are following two sets of lovers. So we have Hero and Claudio, who meet and fall in love. They have an instant love connection, so if you're into instant love as well, this has got that in it. But we also have Beatrice and Benedict, who are old enemies. They are actually very deeply in love with each other, very attracted to each other, but they are both too stubborn to admit it. They're kind of the original Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. So yeah, if you love that enemies to lovers trope, this is the book. Beatrice was my first like literary crush. I just thought she was fantastic. And yeah, if you're into the enemies to lovers, it's definitely this one. And that's the back of that one. I'm just taking this opportunity to basically show off some of the prettiest books in my collection. If you like a psychological drama, we're now getting into like some of the darker plays. If you like a psychological drama, if you like reading that kind of slow descent into madness, then I would really recommend Hamlet. God, look at this edition. It's just beautiful. Yes, so this is following the Prince of Denmark. I don't really want to say too much about what this is about, but I think you can kind of tell from the vibe on the cover and on the back. This is deeper and darker. This is very much, like I said, the slow descent into madness. And yeah, if you like a psychological drama, Hamlet is the play for you. And then I got two more. If you like a good like family drama where everybody hates each other and it all kicks off, I would go with King Lear. Again, I don't want to say too much about this one, but it's very much about like feuding families and, like I said, family drama, and everybody dies at the end. And then finally, if you are a poetry reader, then this is a very easy recommendation to give. If you like romantic poetry, if you like nature poetry, if you like kind of self-reflective poetry, I guess some of it, then I would definitely recommend the Sonnets. Oh, look at this cover again. Like I said, there are 154 sonnets, that's the bard on the back. 154 sonnets. Some of them are just some of the most achingly beautiful love poems. You know, on the back, can you see that? It says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate," which I just think is so beautiful. There's some beautiful like romantic poetry in here. And yeah, if you're already into poetry, then the Sonnets would be the place to start. So those are kind of my like where to start plays and the Sonnets. Some more advice from me in terms of getting into Shakespeare. Adaptations are so important, and Shakespeare's plays were written to be watched. They weren't written to be read. I mean, the Sonnets obviously were, but the plays were written to be performed and watched. And when you watch an adaptation, I feel like it's so much easier. Even if you don't quite understand all of the words, you can pick up from the way the actors are speaking and their body language and what's going on around them, what's happening. I would really highly recommend the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet, because that uses the original script but translates it into a modern story. It's just a fantastic film anyway, and it's like a visual feast. But in terms of getting to grips with the story and the ins and outs of it, I would really recommend that. There's also a fantastic adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing with Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh. I think it was in the 90s, so it's probably a bit dated. But again, especially when Beatrice and Benedict are kind of parrying back and forth and having these really witty arguments, I think it can really help you to get to grips with the language and what's being said by the way that they are saying it. So adaptations are really important. Also, obviously, because Shakespeare is way out of copyright, there are loads of adaptations you can get free online. The BBC is also quite good for finding out adaptations, but there's quite a lot you can find just on YouTube. And then also audiobooks. Audiobooks can really help, I think, with some of the plays that are a bit more complicated and complex. So things like in this stack, Hamlet and King Lear, I would really recommend listening to an audiobook and reading along, because again, you'll get the narrator's kind of tone of voice and be able to pick up from there, you know, what is meant by the words on the page. So I would definitely recommend audiobooks. And then I would also recommend like reading around the topic. So I think Shakespeare plays get easier to read when you understand the context in which they were written. And there's a wealth of published works about Shakespeare out there, which can be a little bit overwhelming, but if you can find a way into Shakespeare by looking at the context, I think that can be really helpful. There are several theories around Shakespeare's work that I find really interesting. I've mentioned this in other videos. There is the theory that the man who was presented to us as William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford, possibly didn't write any or all of the plays, and that he was kind of a figurehead for a group of writers. That's quite a controversial theory, and as someone who has read all of the plays, I think it's quite easy to categorise the voice into about 4 different voices. He did write in different genres, so we have the histories, the comedies and the tragedies, but as someone who has read, like I said, read all the plays several times, it feels like there are at least 4 different voices within the collection of work. However, the way that plays were written at the time was very different to how it is now. It was very collaborative, so you know, he would be sat in his theatre with his actors, with other people coming in and out, with other writers there, and they would collaborate. So there's lots of interesting theories around Shakespeare, and one book that I would recommend if you were interested in that is the fantastically named, I love the title of this book so much, Contested Will, how clever is that, by James Shapiro. And then the subtitle is Who Wrote Shakespeare? And just so that you know, going into this, James Shapiro is a Stratfordian, which means that he does believe that William Shakespeare, the man from Stratford, wrote all of the plays himself and the sonnets, and that he was the sole author. So he's coming at it kind of from the point of view who's someone who is very much not convinced by this theory, but he looks at the different theories that have come about the authorship question through time, who the possible other candidates could have been for the authorship of the plays, and I just found it really interesting. It is a little bit academic, and you know, the text is pretty small on the page, but if you take it slow, I think it's a really interesting book. And then my final tip is to read books based on Shakespeare plays, because if you could read a modern version of it, it might make it easier for you. So I've got one. I don't have that many. There are loads, I just personally don't have many, but one that I definitely want to recommend, which is, ooh, let's not drop all the books, which is a modern retelling of Romeo and Juliet, is Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman. This series is fantastic. I think there's 4 or 5 books in the series. I've read the first 3, I need to finish the series. This is Romeo and Juliet retold, and it's set in a world where the racial power has been flipped on its head, so black people are in power, white people are subjugated, and we have a white boy and a black girl who fall in love, and it goes from there. And it doesn't follow the whole story of Romeo and Juliet. It's very much kind of the premise and setup, but the story, the way that the story goes is fantastic, and it's always one that I recommend to my year 9s to read alongside Romeo and Juliet, just to help them kind of get into that kind of headspace with the story. And then one last book that I'm going to recommend to kind of help you to kind of get into the world of Shakespeare and understand a bit about how it worked is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book I've talked about a lot on my channel. It was one of my favourite reads of last year, but what it does is it takes the historical fact that one of Shakespeare's children, Hamnet, which incidentally, Hamnet is just another way of spelling Hamlet, which I think some people get confused with, because the spelling of names in Shakespeare time was very fluid. It wasn't like it is now. So it's very much, I would very much read these two together. So yeah, so his young son Hamnet died when he was 11. It takes a historical fact and it builds a story around it. And it's very much a look at grief, family grief, the different ways people grieve, but also the role of women. And there is a thread of witchcraft that runs through this, and like natural magic. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic, and to help give a bit of context, I think it could be a good way in. So those are my recommendations for getting started with Shakespeare. I hope this has been useful. If you've got this far, just drop me a comment, let me know, have you read any Shakespeare, and if you have, which is your favourite play? Because I'm always interested to know who, like, people's favourite plays and why, and what it is that hooks them in. For me, I love Much Ado so much because I think it's just the sarcasm and the wit that runs through that play. There's so much wordplay, and as a word nerd, it just really appeals to me. Please subscribe if you would like more of this chaos, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks guys, bye.